Welcome everyone for another episode of All About Teams, where we meet with fellow guests coming across different industries, talking about anything that relates to team collaboration, team performance. And today we have someone very special, Kalsang, coming all the way from Toronto, Canada, working at LinkedIn. And we'll be chatting with Kalsang about the keys to successfully leading teams through change. Hello, Kalsang, how are you today?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very good. Maybe a little bit better than you. You can see we're chatting about this. The weather in Singapore is beautiful. I can see it getting a bit chilly in Toronto, right?
Yeah, we're beginning to pull out our winter gear, dusting off our jackets, our snow boots. We're not there yet, but you can probably see from my attire, it's getting crispy out here.
I can see that. I can see that. Thank you so much for joining us, Kalsang. I've known you for a bit now. We've chatted together for quite some time. Maybe not everyone is familiar with you. I guess everyone is familiar with LinkedIn though. But I think it would be great maybe to start understanding a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do at LinkedIn, Kalsang.
Amazing. Yep. Thank you so much for having me, Os, and it's been fun getting to know you. A little bit about me. So my name is Kalsang Tanzin. I probably just go by Cal in most scenarios. I've been at LinkedIn for almost now 9 years and had been part of many of the organization's transformations. And the most recent one is I lead the enterprise segment for LinkedIn Sales Solutions. What that truly means is our team is helping and inspiring change in sales organizations in some of the largest organizations in North America. And we do this primarily by evangelizing our two platforms, LinkedIn Sales Navigator and LinkedIn Sales Insights. And this topic actually around change is one that is deeply important to me because, of course, we see organizations change, but sales in particular is a craft that continues to evolve. So I'm excited to talk about this.
I am excited as well, Kalsang. Before we dive into all of this conversation, the question I always ask our guests, what is your best memory or the memory you have of being part of the best team ever? And if you can share that with our viewers, Kalsang.
Yeah. So I probably will touch upon teams that I have been a team member in and not team leader, partly because as a team leader, you have just such a connection to the team. So it'll be difficult for me to craft one that is really meaningful.
Sure.
And distinct because all of them were so meaningful and just special for me. Probably the two that comes to mind is in different stages. One when I was an individual contributor early on in my career at LinkedIn, and then one when I was a leader early on in my career in LinkedIn Sales Solutions. And in both these teams, the real distinguished part was that it was a group of people when we first came together that was so awkward. We were all in different stages in our life, different energies, culturally really different. And I just remember in both scenarios being this is not a crew that is going to come together at a bar and just catch up and drink. And what actually really happened in these scenarios is the leader just gave us space, space, and between all the things we do, creating space for people to just connect as humans, come together and talk about their aspirations, challenge each other about our areas of opportunities. It creates incredible trust. And sometimes leaders just have to back off and let the magic happen. And in both those scenarios, the two leaders that are incredible team leaders, I can talk about them, Diana Liu and John Mayhaw, both are just gave us space to do that. And the output of this is it's been a few years, at least from my individual contributor days and my leader days, where we're all doing different things. But I do feel a great sense of pride every time I see my fellow friend or team member do something incredible. And it's kind of as the same, I would imagine, if you went to university, this feeling of alumni network where you always have that relationship. You will always have that wisdom, that energy that you can rely on, even if your challenges are now new. So I've been lucky to be part of some incredible teams, but those two come to mind.
Thanks so much. I love that, Kalsang, and I'm pretty sure you're trying to replicate what you've learned with them together with your teams now. But let's dive a little bit into the topic, successfully leading teams through change. And before we go into the how you actually do this and for you to share some of your experience leading teams through change at LinkedIn, I thought it would be interesting to talk about why change. Why does that matter? What have you seen in the industry or in the world right now that makes it such a high priority for a team leader to consider, Kalsang?
So change really first, it becomes like a really objectively, we are living through like just incredible, unprecedented change on a macro level.
Mm.
So whether it's digital transformation, my mom, for example, like we grew up in India, and like, the way she would do grocery shopping was through like a street vendor every day. The
Yeah.
idea of her like actually getting groceries through a phone app there's just no shot of that ever happening. But even in our personal lives, you see like this like things that would have taken a few years just all expedited in the last 2 years. So I think there's like a macro need for change, and
Mm.
organizations, when that happens, you have some pressures and you also have some opportunities that come up, and your ability to move through change, visualize change, bring others through that is really critical. The second thing about change that probably is more passionate about people leader is,
Mm.
we're in service of our people. And we're in service of our people's different versions of our people. The idea of who they are right now, but the potential of who they can be in 18 months, in 2 years. And that is difficult to realize. That potential is difficult to realize without the ability of understanding the importance of changing,
Mm.
understanding the skills needed to change, and understanding how you can coach people through change. So I think it's actually become a personal thing because it's part of our commitment as people leaders to help the
Yeah.
transformation of our people. And that cannot happen without really appreciating how change works.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Kalsang. The question I would have now is what are some of the challenges and maybe some of the risks of not doing that properly, and maybe you have done that, maybe not with your teams but with other teams in whether it's at LinkedIn or in other organization. What is the risk of not successfully leading teams through change? What do you see then?
I think when we don't lead, so what is that? What is an example of not leading people through change successfully?
Yeah.
So I think people often will be like, we went through change successfully. I mean, unsuccessfully, if the change initiative didn't drive the output we hoped it would drive.
Yeah.
That's like one way to think about it. And I think it's fair, but I also think sometimes you go through things and you realize that you're like, okay, maybe that wasn't the right move. I think that for me, change is a miss, and leading change is a miss when you don't acknowledge what we have, what could have been done better, what worked, acknowledging what we learned on that journey. The lack of like actually the feedback loop in the end,
Mm.
for me, feels like that's where I think change initiatives fail. People want to know, people don't really need success to be a certainty, but they do need to know that the efforts that they've put in, the mindset that they've put in actually led to something, even if that
Yeah.
led to something is a learning. So I think unsuccessful change initiatives is when it ends abruptly with nobody actually acknowledging what happened. And if we do that often, if you are a person that is a consumer of change or feel like a consumer of change, it creates fatigue. So the next time you do a change initiative, next time you're a leader, you're like, okay, squad, we're going to try to do this change. I think you walk in with a little less credibility than you did if you had acknowledged, hey, we tried to do this. This is what worked and this is what didn't work. So the result of lack of good change initiatives is a loss of credibility, loss of resources. But in the end, there's like a change fatigue that happens.
And you can see that even more in the current world we are in right now. I mean, everyone is already tired with the Zoom meeting and the Zoom
Yeah.
fatigue, but I think it is very much about creating energy. That's what change is about, creating energy and being able to kind of sustain the momentum so that, we don't start on a high for the first 2 months and then everything drops. And how can you really make sure that you can accompany your team throughout this longer change journey and really make sure everyone has energy throughout the entire journey.
100%.
Now, when you think about maybe some of the change initiatives that you led together with your team in the past few months or years, is there any kind of pattern or framework that you're referencing or using to make sure that you can actually deliver on the outcome?
So, just so many change frameworks. At LinkedIn, and at least in our line of business, we do have a change for management for leading through change framework, which often involves articulating a why are we going through change, really internalizing that as our leaders as well. It involves like what is the actual metric, what's a leading indicator that we use to like measure how change is going. Then we also think about like what is moneyballing, which means like how do we celebrate the folks who are doing it really well. And then it also involves like how do we like reward, like what does one get if change goes well. So I think there's like we definitely have a change framework. We also have a language around where we are, where we acknowledge and ask ourselves, where are we on this change continuum? So a 1 is an active detractor, a 2 is a passive detractor, a 3 is neutral, a 4 is a passive advocate, and a 5 is an active advocate. And during change, we ask ourselves, like, where are we on the change continuum right now? And what do we need to see, or what do we need to own in order to move through that change continuum? And the beauty of that language is that it creates space for discourse, it creates space for disagreements. So those are like the two we anchor a lot on, and I anchor a lot on. I fundamentally have also, because we've done so much of this over the time, have realized that change is difficult when there's a lack of belief, when there's a lack of skill, and when there's a lack of focus. And usually that just has helped me as a leader try to understand and diagnose if something is happening and it's not working the way we think it should work. Where are we on the belief gap? Like, is there a belief gap, and what do we need to do to build that? Do people have the skills to go through change? And how do we as leaders and how do we as people just like empower ourselves with those skills? Or is there a lack of focus? How do we create space for change to happen? So there's definitely a lot of frameworks, and they're used in different times. You just have to read the room a little bit.
Yeah. And if we focus a little bit more about the first two steps that you mentioned, which is like reinforcing the why and at the same time, like clearly defining a competitive vision and really making sure that people can like visualize what would be a successful outcome of these change initiatives. I think one of the key elements that we hear from working with some of our clients as well is the importance of involving your team members as part of the process. So it cannot just be kind of a top-down, this is why we're doing it, and by the way, this is what we need to achieve. But it's more, how can we create conversation and buy-in within your team member? Is it something that you've experienced as well within your team at Kalsang?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we have to be able to clearly articulate why we're doing what we're doing. And if it's something based on like a futuristic vision, articulating why that futuristic vision is worth thinking about now, because people have so much happening. Like so many people are like, I want to figure out today instead of like what's happening in 24 months. So like being able to connect those two options is really important to articulate like why this could be important for them individually, and individually as a professional is really critical. I think getting feedback is really important, and it becomes like more and more interesting to figure out how do you get feedback, and what's the most productive way to get feedback. So we've tried multiple things. We'll try like, first of all, as a leader, I'll do my own leadership with my own frontline leaders. We'll have time together to digest and ask the question, like, where are you on the change continuum? And what do you need to see in this change in order to be moving from like a 3 to a 5, a 1 to a 3? That really allows us to like tweak and adjust. Same thing with our individual contributors. Like our leaders are doing the same thing with their own teams. And then we bubble up that feedback to figure out what needs to change. There's also a time and place to disagree and commit. Say like, okay, this isn't my ideal state, but because I believe that this is probably going to be right for the larger business and the larger segment, I'm ready to disagree and commit. And I think that takes an important degree of professional maturity and critical as you go through change. Not everyone's going to be happy. Not all your ideas are going to be accepted, but that's okay. You're willing to try. And I like really appreciate when I see so many of our reps and so many of our managers who'd be like, look, there are 8 things that I would like improved. It's not perfect, but I'm ready to disagree and commit and still strive for change.
And one of the biggest kind of challenge you would feel as well as a team member when you go through this kind of change is, and you touched on this, the level of anxiety that comes up because so many of us are not familiar, not knowing what's going to come next, right? And having a lot of uncertainty, whether it's about, am I going to keep my job, or are we going to deliver on the outcome? What happens if we don't? And that creates a lot of vacuum that can actually really impact, the overall team performance. How do you make sure that you keep this kind of human conversation with your team, and so that you can really see when this kind of anxiety level go up within your team member, and help alleviate this, Kalsang?
I think it goes back to the examples of the best teams and the leaders that I've been part of.
Yep.
It's just sometimes giving space and listening.
Yep.
People want to succeed. People want to be great at the change that is important to the organizations. And I think we can drive it, and sometimes it helps to just sit back and listen and try really hard not to have like judgment when someone is talking about why they're grappling with it, what is bothering them and holding them back, and just asking questions like what part of that is like challenging for them, asking them to think about like what do they think will happen if they miss on this change, if they try it and they fail, what's the consequence? And I think if you ask these questions, you'll often realize like there's probably something more to like help them with. Whether, people might think that, okay, if I'm trying this and if I'm not successful, what does this mean? Does it mean that my leaders think I'm not committed? Does it mean that people think I don't have the skills? But you can't uncover that without just creating space and listening to people. And then you can ask them, like, then you can problem solve, and then you can acknowledge, be like, this is not we're actually not going to judge on this. This is an experimentation phase. We're going to try to do this. There's like, you can clarify some of that, but I do think it requires just time to just listen to people.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious because a lot of the team leaders that we talk to theoretically will have the kind of same approach and same answer that you're sharing with us. And then comes the reality of the everyday work, right? And suddenly, if you ask them at the end or throughout the change process, they say, yeah, no, we know it's important, but we just have so many kind of things to take care of in the business. And so we don't create time for this conversation that are essential. I'm more interested to understand like your own leadership journey in there. Have you always been able to create those space, and what has been the journey for you to be able to make sure that this kind of practice become a habit for you, Kalsang, when you lead your team?
It's not always been the case. I am by nature somebody who likes to move fast.
Okay.
So there's probably a few things. Early in my career as a manager, I got like feedback that I go through things really fast, and it doesn't feel like people have that I fully have considered the different aspects, the different complexities, people's opinions.
Yeah.
And so my leader, who I worked really closely with, knew that I did a lot of backward homework. Like I'd be doing one-on-ones with folks or the other organizations, and I'd like do a lot of the background homework in order for me to like land in an opinion, and then I'm ready to go. And then she said something along the lines of like, you just have to speak your thoughts, and speak your thoughts early on. Like tell people that in this space right now, I am in like for the next like 2 months, 3 months, I'm going to be really focused on understanding problem X.
Yeah.
And in order for me to really do that, I'm going to be talking to X, Y, and Z people. And if you're interested in this topic, I would welcome you to be part of that journey.
Mm.
And she's like, the effort you're actually doing of doing all that work is important. It's leading up to something, but people don't know that because they only see you from point A to point B. They don't actually see all the things you're doing. So the idea of like speaking your thoughts is really important. Mind you, it's still like a work in progress. Like I'm still driven by trying to figure out how to go through change faster. Like how, like there is like intrinsic behaviors that I'm still like trying to acknowledge, but I do try now continue with that lesson, being like, hey, first 30 days, this is what I'm going to focus on. First 60 days, this is what I'm going to focus on. I usually will try to anchor, like it's November, I'm going to anchor on people being like, this is what I'm going to probably focus on in Jan and Feb.
Yeah.
So that people know it's coming.
Yeah.
And also can influence me and feel like they have space to influence the thinking. And we can talk and brainstorm ideas at the space because they know that's what's top of mind. So it really stemmed from, my change stemmed from feedback early on. And I'm grateful to my team members who like just had the courage to give me that feedback because it was such a transformational feedback for me.
I love the level of awareness you have, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will really kind of relate to what you're sharing. And it's great to see that it's still work in progress, but at least you've had this kind of awareness, and you've been able to act on it and kind of just move from this is something that I know to this is something that I can actually make sure I do whenever I lead my team through change. It was really interesting to hear you talk about how you kind of communicating the different milestone in a way. This is what we will be focusing on in the next few months, and what's going to come after that, and the next milestone, so that at the end, this vision that seems kind of far away becomes a little bit more realistic. Now, throughout the whole change process, there's definitely a need to kind of create feedback loop, talk about what is it that we could have done better or that we can do better, like until the next milestone. What we see as well is the need to celebrate success. And I think you mentioned that. And very often in organization or in teams, this is forgotten about. We spend sometimes just too much time looking at what's not working versus looking at what's actually working, what can we be proud of. How are you making sure, or maybe you can share some of the examples that you've had with your team, celebrating success and looking at the impact it had on the team members in your team, Kalsang?
So I love like offsites and team dinners and like being able to like toast people. So I don't know. I don't know if this is like what my direct reports would say, and I'm like curious to hear their own feedback. But for me, like as a leader, it was always like meaningful. When it's an experience, it's always more meaningful to me.
Yeah.
So if when we were in person, being able to like wrap up end of quarter and go for like dinner or drinks, and then we toasting each other. We have a tradition when somebody on our team gets promoted, we toast or we roast them.
Nice.
And it's just like it brings people together, and that was like really meaningful. I think like, I just have these like random moments. Like one of my team members really worked really hard to get this like thing that hit their number, worked really hard to like grow, and just like a moment I was like, go celebrate and send me a picture, and we like framed that picture. So I think there's like multiple ways to celebrate, but I usually enjoy the ones which involves like human connections, whether it's being able to like send a quick video celebrating them, calling them, or like just figuring out a way to come together to toast them. So I tend to fall into that category, but I also understand there are like other ways to celebrate, which we've experimented with and we play around with as well. But my natural inclination tends to be around human connection.
No, I love that. And as you say, the most important is about celebrating it, like no matter how you do it. And especially as a team member, and now I have some fond memories of when we celebrated together with my ex-boss as well. It just, you feel heard, you feel valued, you're just more motivated. You want to keep working for that team leader, for that organization. And again, that's just one way to keep the energy a little bit high up throughout the entire change journey versus having everyone drained up after a few months. In a lot of ways, it's I mean, it's a bit of a kind of buzzword or saying, but it's not so much of a sprint. It's way more kind of a marathon and looking at where are the snacks of the celebration that you can have kind of along the way to make sure you cross the line at the end, Kalsang.
The one thing we do in the virtual environment, which I do, but I'm really curious if people enjoy it, but I like to like create buzz because in person we would be like, we could high five each other, do all of this.
Yeah.
So my team, when they like close deals, I get the one deal alert, right? And I like take a screenshot of that and share it on the team's chat so that people can like chime in and give kudos to them. And I don't do it just for the largest deal. I'll do it for other deal sizes as well.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to like figure out how do you like create that buzz that we get in the sales floor virtually. So I definitely try that. And I think that's like a way to do it more scalably as well. But at the same time, people know, feel recognized. And then other team members have an opportunity to congratulate them as well.
That's it. No, I love what you're doing with your team, Kalsang. We're coming at the end of the video podcast. I know we could go way more longer talking about a lot of different things when it comes to change. Maybe just to kind of close off, if you had a team leader that was listening to us right now, that was actually leading their team through change, what would be the number one thing you would like him or her to remember to kind of be successful in the journey?
So this is like a question that I just ask myself, and then I encourage people who are wanting to be leaders ask themselves: did my team or business go through change X faster, slower, or at the same pace because of my contribution? And worth recognizing, because I think we all think we are good at change, but given the success rate of change initiative, somebody's not great at it. So it's just worth acknowledging if you are somebody who's, the team has gone through change slower because of you, has gone through change at the same pace because of you. Are you satisfied with that? Are you satisfied with the role you're having in the change initiative? And then it's worth asking, like, do you want to be like a driver of change or a consumer of change? And depending on what job you're in, what your career aspirations are, these answers will change and differ. But I do think as a leader, first is like really self-reflection on how we ourselves go through change and our role in helping others go through change.
I will definitely steal that coaching questions from you, Kalsang. I love that. I think I will use it with some of the teams that I'm working with. If you give me the opportunity to do that. It was a pleasure to have you as part of the video podcast today, Kalsang. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.